Ammar, how's it going? Um, my friend, if I had a tissue, I'd give it to you right now.
I haven't branded this, but they are my tears. They're going to be up for sale at some point. If you guys want it, I'm calling them Ammar's Tifosi tears.
I presume they're only the spare ones left over from the swimming pool that you went
Yeah, I
swimming in.
mean, they look pretty red, so they're on course for the brand itself, but there's not much to speak of otherwise. I mean, I'll do a 50% discount because evidently we can't finish races either. So
Yeah, right. I mean, I guess we're going to get into why your tears are red at some other point. But maybe you should see a doctor about that, Ammar. Let's talk about the race though. Um, Chinese Grand Prix 2025 in the bag.
mm, mhm.
I guess we might as well come to your favorite, less than favorite topic, at least today. Um, Ferrari. How did Ferrari reach the peaks of um, sprint qualifying pole and sprint race victory to the depths of um, disqualification on Sunday? What happened?
Ferrari have now given you a buffet of items, right, that you can pick from the first two weekends of 2025, right? They have shown that they can win free practice, check. They have shown that they cannot translate that into qualifying, check. They have shown that they are going to be on par, miserable in terms of strategic calls and setup when there are changing conditions, check. All right. They've shown that the drivers can push a little bit hard and make mistakes because they have to obviously compensate for what the pit wall is doing or not doing. Check. They have given you a sprint win. Check. They have given you again a qualifying that has been underwhelming at best. Check. And then, of course, they top it off with the granddaddy of all. In 75 years, Shez, it has never happened where two Ferraris have been DNF, double DNF. Way to go, man. I am ready to put a double DNF sign up here. Like in 70, now a DNF has happened, but for both cars to be double DNF, disqualified, I should say, disqualified. Just to say that I didn't mean DNF in the strictest sense. Although, who cares, man? Who cares? Shaz,
It's
if you had
it's
gone into
back.
this race,
It's back.
it's back. If you had gone into this weekend telling me they're going to double DNF, I would have taken that result, Shez. I would have taken that because this is insult to injury, to insult to injury, three times over. I mean, it was at best, a mediocre weekend, if that's what you want to call it. And we were going to come back and sort of parse through radio calls, which also, by the way, cheeky move, FOM, trying to create more drama where there isn't one. But guess what? None of that matters. None of you can take all of that, wrap it up nicely, and then throw it in the trash because that is what Ferrari gave you. So this is my expert analysis for you, Shez.
True. I think they would aim for the trash, but they would probably miss. Amar,
Yeah, we missed that too.
just tell me why exactly are you so upset about these particular disqualifications? And we might as well just put in for clarity right now. They were that both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were disqualified for two different
There you go. We
things.
cornered the market there too. Like, what do you need? Like, see, that's why I said it's a buffet, Shez. This is inexcusable, absolutely horrendous. And Fred Vasseur has to look in the mirror. I mean, the honeymoon is up, Fred. It is up right now. I'm done with your snazzy marketing, everything with Lewis Hamilton posing like this, posing like that. We've done all of that. And it looks like you guys have been watching the same things that the rest of us have been watching from our couches. Okay? No one is paying attention to the basics. This cannot happen, Chaz. And ironically, both Lewis and Charles were disqualified for sort of similar reasons in Austin in 23. So this is not new to either Lewis's side, and I can't blame Lewis for this, but certainly not new to Ferrari. What are you doing? What are you literally doing? And by the way, Shez, we dunk on Charles a lot. Not me, but there's a lot of people. But Charles called it from the cockpit where they went to Plan C, and he said, "I told you." And this is pretty damning, pretty damning. And I cannot blame the drivers for anything at all. This is 100% not on them. Ferrari should be ashamed of themselves.
Okay, just explain a little bit. Like, why did Ferrari? They obviously knew that plank wear is a problem. It was something that they got caught out for at a previous sprint weekend in Austin, and there was a big uproar there that well, you have parc ferme conditions from the second you start sprint qualifying to the end of the Grand Prix weekend, so you can't change anything. But surely, if that's the case, Ammar, you're going to need to explain to me why did Ferrari fall foul this time?
Just, I don't know that anyone can give you a logical explanation for any of this, because it makes no logical sense that they would have got this so wrong so badly. Keep in mind that Charles Leclerc's car was 1 kilo underweight, right? So you have that variety there. Now, I think in the simplest of senses, you can say that they were looking for more performance, right? And we can get into the details of what that means. Clearly, a slightly underweight car would give some advantage. Charles had a broken front wing, which I guess was a good thing in a way. So even that couldn't be something that would happen by design, right? You have that. And then on the Lewis side of things, I don't know what they saw from the sprint win and then change for qualifying, but I couldn't have imagined they got it too wrong. Now, listen, some of this is in marginal, right? You can go a little bit here and there, and it's slight errors that sort of get expanded, and that's what we're seeing now. But among the front runners, nobody got it this wrong. And I could have come on here and said, look, that would have been a great performance had they been in the mix for the win. I think you could argue that in Charles' case, there was potentially that at some point you could have thought that he could have potentially been in the mix, but they were just not anywhere close to it. So I'm not even sure I can sit up here and say that any of what they did or didn't do or intend to do actually merit to any kind of performance in any which way, because they pretty much ended where they had started. And so I don't know, Shez. I think the simplest answer is it's sheer incompetence. That's all you can say they did.
We should probably just dive into a little bit of detail about what these infringements were, right? So
more pain for me.
Yeah, but it is important because actually the depth of the race team's failures are pretty apparent in these two mistakes, right? So the first one is that Lewis Hamilton was essentially disqualified for plank wear to the rear end of the plank. The reason that Austin is important is because after Austin, everybody complained that, look, how are we supposed to change the car if there is parc ferme conditions right the way across the weekend? And that made sense, right? If you've got a car that's illegal for the sprint race, it's still going to be illegal for the race, but you can't change it. You're not allowed to. So the parc ferme rules were changed after that. Especially with the new format that we have. So it means that after the sprint race, before Grand Prix qualifying, parc ferme rules are lifted and you can set your car up differently, which is something that Lewis Hamilton's side of the garage did. They changed their car from the sprint to Grand Prix qualifying to try and get a better feeling out of it. Now, that seemed to backfire on two fronts. The first is that Lewis said that he went down the wrong path. He said, I'm not going to do that again because all of the pace that he had in the first half of the weekend seemed to have disappeared on him. You could see that quite clearly in the race. But also, it's a bit silly when you know that the parc ferme rules are opened up for you to make changes to ensure that your car is not illegal, for it to then be illegal for the exact same reason that you were disqualified in Austin. That to me is absolutely nuts. The second one, so Charles Leclerc was disqualified for being, I think, 1 kilo underweight overall. And that was, as you said, Ammar, that you could say that, was it because of the front wing being damaged? Well, no, because what the stewards did, or what the scrutineers did, was they took that wing off and they put a replacement wing on, apparently one that was slightly heavier anyway, and the car still came in 1 kilo underweight. And similar to what had happened in Spa last year to George Russell, the team made a statement saying, look, the resurfacing of the track Spa, the fact that we went for a one-stop Spa meant that the car was under-tired and therefore underweight. Now, remember, the mitigating factor that George Russell had in Spa was that there's a shorter run. There isn't a proper parade lap. at Spa. So where the cars are going around to pick up the pickup to add weight to their tires to bring them back up to the minimum weight. George Russell didn't have that in Spa, and therefore his car was underweight, probably for that reason. But in China, they didn't have that excuse. So, despite a fully weighted front wing and with the full allowance of having a parade lap to do the pickup, Charles Leclerc's car was still underweight. How do you do that? This isn't like
It's
groundbreaking. It's like this is basic strategic maths, and
just, and this is,
they fell down on it. I don't get
and
it.
and this is why you cannot rationally explain it, right? And the thing is, you can look at all of these things individually, but I think the upshot of this is they just haven't come into this season ready. They just haven't. They've fallen under the romanticism of having Lewis Hamilton there. They've worked so hard on their marketing that behind the scenes they have not prepared well. And it's one thing to say, look, you have a new driver in Lewis. There's some sort of getting along and getting together, and a matter of opinion and a difference of opinion, those kind of things. And there are some strategic decisions that are taken that might not be taken otherwise. That is one thing. This is fundamentals. This is basics. You cannot have this happen, given exactly what you said about what happened with George Russell last year. So it's not like the evidence wasn't there for any of this. The precedent wasn't there for any of this. It just doesn't make sense that they would follow a pretty good sprint race with all of this. It just makes no sense. And I can only, the only thing you can really take away from this is that they don't know what they're doing. They remind me a little bit of what Mercedes were last year, at the beginning of last year, where they were just sort of scrambling around to find out what's exactly happening. And both drivers are kind of echoing the same thing, where I heard Charles in 3 of the qualifyings say the same thing thematically. Like the setup of the car is just not ideal for him. So clearly on his side of the garage, they've not found out what to do. It was the same with Lewis. To Lewis's credit, as a 7-time champion, he enforced his will, and the sprint result happened and they happened. Although I will add, there was a bit of luck there, right? Because what we knew in the sprint qualifying was that McLaren completely flubbed it. So Ferrari could have walked away with nothing to show for in that race too, potentially. They would have had a 4th and a 5th at best, probably. And so what they have done, it suggests to me, is that they don't know how to operate this car, and they don't know how to get it in the right window. And that's why you're seeing all these errors. That's absolutely the case. There's no other way to explain it.
And thank God for the sprint race then. But before we go on to other matters, it is I think it's important just to have a look at the driver standings at the moment, because after the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, Lance Stroll is currently ahead of both Ferrari drivers in the driver standings.
Congratulations. Hey, let's have the debate on whether he's better than Alonso. I'm ready for that.
Before they were disqualified, though, the Ferrari drivers were involved in a race. And on the road, they finished 5th and 6th, but not in the order that they started. Charles Leclerc suddenly seemed to find a gear. Ammar, just talk to me about Charles versus Lewis. What happened? How did Charles suddenly end up?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. I think I personally saw this coming for a little bit. I think that again, it seems to me that Ferrari have given up Saturdays for Sundays as a sort of a philosophical approach to the weekend, and that they're setting the car up, although not properly, for the race week, or for the race day rather. And Charles has done something very good towards the end of the season, which is do just about well enough on Saturday qualifying to put the car in correct positions. And then with race pace and sort of tire management, has managed to do something that has shown up in results. And I don't think you need to look that far behind. I mean, look at Monza, he started P4. Look at Austin, he started P4. Sure, there was a little bit of squabbling in the beginning, but he did manage to win these races in sort of different ways, right? One was sort of in round of pit stops, and the other was sort of taking the lead at the first turn and never seizing it throughout the race in Austin. So there's been enough evidence to suggest that Ferrari had sort of aced their Sundays up until really this weekend, you could say. And I was willing to give them a pass for Melbourne because of changing conditions, rain, and just their sheer struggles with sort of judging conditions and when to pit. But I personally thought that Charles had done just about enough on Saturday to have a good showing on Sunday. And look, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, if you will, in terms of how Lewis and him switched spots. And we should just add that Whereas we heard radio messages about Ferrari telling Lewis what to do, it was actually Lewis who said, look, I'm holding Charles up, let him through. Let's see if he can go ahead and make an impact. Go get Russell maybe, and then see how that goes. Unfortunately, it couldn't happen well enough. And I think although Charles was quicker than Lewis, he did have that wing damage. And I think there was a little bit of overcompensating for it, which ultimately showed up towards the end of the race in that he had pushed his tires way too far. I mean, this is something that Charles himself said. And yes, maybe it was a blessing in disguise that he lost that front end plate, but in the long run, it didn't really help. And I think, again, you still have to look at this race and say they were behind George and they were behind the two McLarens and Max too. I think Max probably was a more gettable sort of position at this race if the front wing end plate had stayed and if they were able to do a little bit better in terms of tire management. But I still think that they're a step behind all of these guys. And Shez, I think the one thing to note is we're talking about these differences as if they're significant. These are all marginal differences between the top four teams, the top six drivers, if you will. But they show up glaringly on weekends like this when you have issues that go around otherwise. So I'm not surprised that Charles kind of did that. But then again, I don't know what to make of it. He was 1 kilo underweight. So you could argue that probably helped him.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing here, really, is that he had a bit of a weight advantage. A kilo, like he's not going to have that kilo for the entirety of the race, because if it is indeed because of the tires, then that's a gradual loss of that weight over the course of time. But it's just that is weight that other drivers still had to contend with throughout the race. So although it's cumulative across the entirety of the race, he's still if you measured the weight of his car at any point, compared to his competitors in a similar fuel and tire usage point, he would still his car would still weigh less. But I do think you're being a bit too doom and gloom, because actually, first of all, let's be categorical here. Yeah, the damage to the front wing did not help Charles Leclerc. He lost 30 points of downforce because of that, and that has an impact on his front tires at a race where front tires are at a premium. So he said after the race, let me come back to that, because I think the point here that we're making is that Charles shot off ahead of Lewis Hamilton and sort of beat him fairly comprehensively until towards the end of the race. That's not the point here. That just tells you that Charles was unfortunately just, for a Lewis Hamilton fan, just driving better than Lewis was in the race this weekend. We'll come back to some of the excuses that were made for that, and I have something to say about that too. But we'll come back to that. The point that Charles was trying to make was that if I didn't have that 30-point loss of downforce, then number one, I would have kept Max behind me. Second, I would have been able to compete at the front, and not with the Mercedes of George Russell, but with the McLarens of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. So actually that front wing did not help him at all. And actually, he probably set the car up how he wanted. He had the right car, and if he hadn't had that incident at the front at the first corner, actually his on the track result might have been even better. I accept though that would have made the disqualification even more galling, but we should probably add that little light of hope at the end. Lewis turned around and said, look, we changed the car after the sprint race for the full race, and that then meant that the car fell out of its window, and he just wasn't able to get the pace, and he said, look, I'm never going to do that again. Fine. That to me does sound a little bit excusey, because the same thing happened to him last year. You can argue that he's still trying to understand the car, but this sort of pattern of Lewis trying out a setup experiment and it not working, that for me, it's a bit worrying that that's followed him over from Mercedes. If you remember the same race last year, he tried out something absolutely mental and couldn't get out of Q1 in Grand Prix qualifying last year, and apologized over the radio to the team saying, I will never do this again. And here we are in China 12 months later, and he's saying the same thing again. That is really worrying for me. Charles definitely had the legs on him in the race this weekend. It's encouraging for me that he out-qualified him in both qualifying sessions that we had. But in the race, which is where I always thought his strength was going to be, it didn't quite have it
Yeah,
this
but
weekend. Go
But
on.
I would caution you against being too doom and gloom on this too, because I think again, well, first thing we need to add is that we should be talking about the inter-team battle if we're at the front. We're not at the front. So I think if you sort of take a step back from this, Ferrari's still behind McLaren and Mercedes and Max. So this is not a good thing in general too, right? And Chez, I would just give some hope of optimism for both drivers too, because look, Ferrari have changed the car radically. I mean, we kind of forget about this in hindsight, right? But they've extended their sort of their wheelbase, right, a little bit in terms of the architecture of it, and they've also gone from the push rod to the pull rod suspension layout, but have kept the pull rod towards the back. So they're sort of in contrast to these teams, and I don't think they've kind of hit the nail in the head. And I think Shez, this season is going to tell us a little bit more about how Ferrari have the capability to develop, right? Because they've either hit the nail in the head and found a unicorn in terms of all of the sort of the mechanical architecture of the car, if you will, or it's going to be a giant dud. And at this point, I think it looks a little bit like a dud. I can't call it a giant dud, Red, because we've only had one weekend with sort of all clean conditions per se. But what worries me a little bit more is not about the two drivers and their ability or inability to get the car set up right. It's sort of the team as a whole that they're not able to get it right. And they're just sort of poking holes and looking at it and saying, well, is it this or is it that or is it this or is it that? And it's not looking good right now from that standpoint.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree because I think Charles managed to get his setup just right for Sunday.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
But I mean,
so I
1
think
kilo less
still,
too. So, you
yeah,
know.
true. But, so I think there's still some work to be done. Okay, lest this become a pure Ferrari discussion, let's have a little chat about a bookend to both sides of the grid, because Max Verstappen ended up finishing fourth after a late surge, getting past Charles and not quite hounding, but at least being in range of George Russell towards the end. And yet his rookie teammate qualified last, started from the pit lane and made his way all the way up to a heady 15th.
Oof.
So the chat on the street is that Liam Lawson might not even make it to the grid in Japan. Certainly not as a Red Bull driver. I'll tell you what I've heard, what I've read. So the Autosport post-race podcast suggested that there's been a meeting, or there is an emergency meeting that's going to happen between Marco, Horner, the bigwigs at Red Bull. In the intervening week or two, Liam Lawson, Max Verstappen are all going to turn up. They're all going to pour through the data to try and work out what is going on for Liam. And I have to stress that this is an ongoing problem with the second seat at Red Bull. I'm going to bookmark that because we're going to have to come back and have a conversation about the ongoing saga that is the second seat at Red Bull. But I just want to focus on Liam for this week. But if there are no obvious glaring improvements that they can make, and it is just that Liam isn't getting on with his car, then I've heard a couple of different scenarios, but the most likely one is that Liam will get knocked back down to VCARB and Yuki Tsunoda will get the nod to be in Japan. To that, you respond, go.
Well, I would just caution Yuki against taking the seat because evidently this is like, you know how they say that the seat next to the driver is a death seat, right? In regular day-to-day cars. This is what this is. This is basically a career killer seat. And I'm not sure that anyone should take it. Like normally you would say that if there's a seat open on the Formula One grid that you should be running towards. I'm being tongue-in-cheek here, but look, I would be excited for Yuki. I think you and I are, and many of us have been in agreement that he was sort of the natural guy to sort of proceed to progress to the Red Bull seat, and would have made all the sense in the world. I really feel bad for Liam because this effectively, if this happens, we should add, it effectively sort of puts a full circle on his career, and he wouldn't have even had two proper races before that would have started happening because this stuff was happening as early as the end of the Melbourne weekend. And had it not been for Ferrari's mishap, Shez, this would be an even bigger story, and it still might be. I really don't know what to do other than, Shez, at what point are we going to hold Red Bull's management accountable for this? Like, at what point are we going to say, there could be one or two different things. Either they're not picking the right drivers and or don't have a good sort of progression system from their sister team to the Red Bull team, which I guess you could argue and Yuki Tsunoda as an example of that, because it seems like they're going to, and look, I'm not even sure they're going to still put Yuki in there. I think they'll find somebody else to kind of put in before they put it. I'm not going to be convinced until I see it. But Shez, at what point are we going to say that Red Bull are developing the car so much in line with Max and Max only that it seems like no other driver can drive? And these are not scrubs we're talking about. Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, we're talking about Checo Perez. Now we're talking about Liam Lawson. I mean, presumably, if they put Sonoda in there, he's going to struggle too, right? Because it couldn't be this glaring. It couldn't be this bad. And I get that the field has shrunk a little bit, but to not be able to be in the mix, not be able to get out of Q1 week in and week out, I don't know, man. Shez, I think that there's something with the car, and at some point we're going to have to start looking in that direction. But those are where my thoughts are. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I take that point. That's an argument that has come up a lot. I think Liam is a slightly special circumstance, and that number one, it's absolutely mental that we're talking about switching out a driver after the second race, and a guy that they consciously promoted ahead of the guy that had ostensibly beaten him across the 11 races that they competed together in the same team. So they must have seen something, but whatever that is isn't showing up in his performances in the first two races. But is that enough to warrant a death sentence? I don't know. I think it's a bit tricky. But then by the same token, and Andrew Benson made this observation that a second, a lap slower than your teammate is a huge amount, right? And okay, I get that Red Bull has a particular way it wants to be driven, and that Max has a very particular way of exploiting that. But are you really telling me that a top line Formula One driver, that somebody that has come through all of the junior ranks, that has, as one of our mutual frenemies on Twitter continues to tell us, he won on debut in the DTM. He won on debut in Super Formula. It's not like Liam Lawson doesn't know how to pedal a single seater. So is it really realistic to say that he's actually a full second off of Max Verstappen? That to me does speak of a driver that one has just been thrown into the deep end with just not enough experience of how the organization and how being a Formula One driver works. And second, that yes, there is that there needs to be some base level of skill that is required to get something out of that car. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if you put, let's say, who's the next?
Shez?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to lead down your path. Which driver do I have to put in there for you and for them to have similar results? Maybe not as bad, but similar results for you to say, okay, this is really not about the driver anymore. Like what are we saying Carlos Sainz? Are we saying, what are we saying? What are we saying now? Because they had a chance as Carlos too.
But they've been down that route as well, right? What I'm saying is Red Bull are so ensconced in this whole, we have to have a driver one, driver two, where Max is always the lead driver and everybody else that's brought in is there to just support him, that they won't countenance having a driver that might challenge him. But the counterpoint to that is that you don't know what the level of that car ultimately is, because the only person that can get anything out of it at the moment is Max. You don't know that if you put Charles Leclerc in that car, that he wouldn't suddenly be on the same pace or still be a second off. Now, if Charles Leclerc gets in that car and is a second off the pace, Red Bull really do have a problem, right? Because it does mean that literally only one driver can drive that car. And then you have to, then in real terms, it doesn't really matter who they stick in the other car, because that person was always going to be miles off the pace and they're never going to get the right driver in that car. But then the
Yeah.
cat. But that I guess is a question back to you, Omar. What do you think?
I,
What do they
I,
need
I
to
don't
do?
I don't I mean this is inexplicable, right? I don't understand. I mean, as you said, these are top tier drivers with great resumes. We're not talking about a Logan Sargent, no disrespect, but we're not talking about someone like that with very little experience being very green. And I mean, I don't know. I've heard all kinds of theories about putting Hadjar in there or maybe even getting Colapinto in there. And like I don't quite understand what Red Bull are doing. I mean, isn't Checo Perez technically still available because he's still under contract, right? So I mean, might as well put him back in there, and you can recover all of that
I
sponsorship money.
think
I
he
don't.
was paid off quite a bit to terminate
Okay,
that
so
contract.
now look at where that is at, right? Like so, I don't know, Shed. This is not explicable. I mean, I don't understand how they could be like, as you said, a 1 second difference. That to me suggests that there is already more in the way in the way the Red Bull is set up that only and only favors Max. And it's been pretty evident that they've put all of their eggs in the Max basket, and that's fine. I suppose you could argue that they don't need to make a change because all they're looking for this year is a Max Verstappen championship, and that's about it. It really doesn't matter if they're not looking at the constructors, right? I mean, they're not even gonna be in the top five, in my opinion, when all of this is said and done, because that's just not what they're looking for, and I don't understand what they're doing behind the scenes to kind of warrant that. Look, I would love to see Yuki in that seat because I think he deserves it. I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure I'd be really happy because I imagine we're going to be having those conversations in 2 or 3 weeks. And what Red Bull have done as a result of this is, even if they make a change right now, it's not going to be fair to either driver. I mean, Liam's career is pretty much full circle at that point in terms of having a seat at the top of the grid. And then Yuki is left with an unwinnable position, although he doesn't have much to lose anyway. So I suppose you could argue that it could only be good for him if he does manage to succeed there. But I don't know, Shez. I'm already there. I don't need a Charles Leclerc to be put in that car for to know that. I feel like it's still something there with the car itself.
Yeah, that I think is another conversation about whether the
Yeah.
car is being set up just for Max, or if Max is just able to exploit a car that is as fast as it can go. And I alluded to that in a video we did earlier this weekend. But uh, I guess my other point about all of this is, like, does Red Bull owe something to their driver? Because these are drivers that are coming up through their own driver academy, who have no affiliation with any other team. So when they get chucked out on the scrap heap, they are literally left to fend for themselves, right? Pierre Gasly managed to get back into AlphaTauri and was much better at AlphaTauri than he ever was at Red Bull. Winning a race as he did. Alex Albon seems to have reinvented himself, and the driver that has been put in against him is also somebody that was touted to be someone that was going to blow him away. But Albon is actually doing very very well against him in the first two races of 2025. That's another driver that was part of the Red Bull driver program that would have been chucked on the scrap heap with no return if everyone believed that their level was the level they showed in that second Red Bull seat. So do Red Bull owe their drivers a bit more, especially Liam Lawson, who's had 11 races in the junior team and then 2 races only in the Red Bull? But what is it they can do other than give him more time, which may be
Well,
an
but
ever
that's just it.
worsening cycle of torment? Um, how can they promote this driver who clearly has some potential so that he doesn't then become, out of
Yeah.
F1 with no chance of a return, because that's the only reputation he has?
Here's what they can do, Shez. They're not going to change the way the car is built, developed, etc. Right? Here's what they can do. They can be patient. That's all they can do now. They have to defend against all the noise that all of us, the collective us, are creating, and give Liam a good 6 to 8 races, maybe up until Spain, until that directive sort of comes into place, right? And really say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Max is going to do his thing, and that's all we're working for this year anyway. Just be patient, give him the 9 races, and then whenever the appropriate summer break is, right, that's when you make those decisions, and then give Yuki the rest of the year to really, as a favor to him, give him a chance to prove whether he deserves to be in the Red Bull seat or make a good showing for another seat, potentially somewhere else, wherever that somewhere else might be. It's hard to think of where that might be, but at least do that, because
That
making a change right now, Shez? And the fact that there's rumors about this meeting, what do you think it does to the confidence of Liam Lawson? It shoots it even further, as if there was a chance for that to happen too, right? So he's going to be in the gutter already, and now this is going to add on to him. How is he supposed to feel confident? I guess the only thing you can say, Shez, is Liam has also had great success at Suzuka. That is quote unquote his track. So you can wait and see what happens. But the fact that they're having this meeting,
I think
it's
that
factual.
so if he gets dropped before Suzuka and they put Yuki in that car and Yuki finishes or starts 20th in front of his home fans, I will
The
never
double.
forgive Red Bull for that because it
Well,
is
but I mean,
it's such a predictable
yeah,
outcome. Yuki doesn't have a chance to say no. Like what driver is going to say no, I don't want to be in that seat in the position that the junior Red Bull drivers are in, but you know what the result is going to be. And I just want to point this out that currently Red Bull are already not at the forefront of the front wing flexing technology. Let's be clear what that is about. It's there to allow the car to be balanced. It means that in the fast corners, you can flatten off the front wing so that the rear wing then doesn't end up unbalanced with too little downforce and step out. But in the slow corners, you still have front end downforce, so you're not washing wide. Come Spain, when they get rid of that, I suspect that Red Bull will push even further towards the way that Max Verstappen drives because it is in their advantage to do that. Max can live with a really, really wobbly rear end because he wants a really, really sharp front end. So they can pile on the downforce on the front wing and he'll just live with a rear end that wants to step out all the time. And it just perpetuates what they have been doing already. Alex Albon already spoke about the fact that the front end is so sensitive. It's like having a mouse when you're playing a video game that just moves all over the place at the touch of your hand. That's how sharp the front end of that Red Bull is, and I guarantee it will get worse after the technical directive comes into force in Spain, because Red Bull will no longer even have the tool. They have to peg that back. So Max is going to be even more in his element. In And Red Bull are going to push even further towards that, and it's going to make the second seat even more untenable for whoever is in that seat. I don't know what they're doing. Like I think that the loss of Adrian Newey and the fact that they have no route to go any other direction, the barrel down the one they're in at the moment, is majorly down to the fact that they don't have the calming hand of Adrian Newey and his nuggets of sense and reason that allows them to go on a path that allows both of those cars to perform. And I just don't see a way back for them right now.
yeah, no, there absolutely isn't. And they brought it upon themselves, right? I mean, we are a year removed from Checo getting renewed and then subsequently not being able to even come back this year. And so they've created this mess on their own. I guess you could have argued back then when they gave Checo the extension that if they had kept him in there, there was maybe potentially a chance of, because Checo had been with the car that long, that he could have made something out of it. But just this simply boils down to giving him more time, because you're going to have to give some driver a chance to finish out the season. And your best bet, to be honest, is to just let him finish out as many races as he can. And you got to live with the consequences, because these decisions are made, and it's not really, Liam's fault that all of this is happening. I feel really bad for him. I wore this Kiwi hat in support of him because I don't know if we'll see him in Suzuka or not. I sure as hell hope we do, because even though I'm a Sonoda supporter, I don't want to see a driver being chucked out just after two races, one of which I should add was in the rain. And that's not even a true test of performance, really, to be honest, if we're going to be fair. So really, it would be after one race that they would be chucking him out. But that gap is sure as hell very, very big. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Oof. All right. Okay. Final item on the docket. Just wanted to talk about our race winner and the guy that
Funny, there was one, huh?
the guy that came second. So Oscar Piastri won it. I thought fairly comfortably. I thought McLaren probably had that pretty much under control. I found it very, very interesting, actually, just as an aside, that Kimi Antonelli won Driver of the Day. I'm gonna just on F1's behalf say that's a load of nonsense, and suggest that perhaps there were better contenders for driver of the day. Oscar Piastri is one of them. Max Verstappen is another, and there is a third. There is a third.
Yeah. So if you're not clinging on to one British guy, then you are to other. I'm guessing you're going to talk about Lando Norris, no?
No, I am not.
I got you. Hey, yeah, okay. I mean, yes, if you want to get to, and I'll just say this because all you Russellites are going to come after me already and acting
All
like he's won
three
the
of them.
champion.
All three of them.
Yes, all of you guys. Hey, I'm here, man. Listen, I'm here. Educate me. Who's the better driver? Is it Russell or is it Oscar? Should Russell be in Oscar's seat? You tell me that now. We've had a lot of these debates. I can't wait to have those debates with you. Look, George had a great race. All credit to him. He managed to do the kind of race that you would have hoped for. He put the car on the front row. We knew that the McLaren was a step ahead. Lando, by the way, to his credit, did what he had to do, not once, but twice. And all credit to him as well. I mean, look, at the front end, this was a boring race, as it really was. And part of it is because everybody did exactly what you expected them to do. On your point for Max, look, it was a bit of a wash, right, between him and the Ferraris. I mean, they were sort of neck and neck. And of course, Leclerc's issues maybe in the end kind of did it. It would have been nice to see a battle between the two of them. Unfortunately, we're not going to get one, it looks like, because of Ferrari's issues. But all credit to George. This was a great race from. These have been two great weekends for him. He is at the moment clearly the leader. I would say though that Antonelli guy, how old is he? Is he 18? He's 18, right? Or 17 or 18 or 19, something like.
He did finish 40 seconds behind George Russell, though.
He did, but I mean, Shez, you know that a lot. Come on, like just okay, you're being disingenuous now. You know that.
Well, I haven't
look.
Only because Mercedes did admit that he had a damaged floor.
He did,
but I find that in and of itself very, very interesting. They're so quick to come up with Anthony didn't do that well, but he did have this problem. They did the same thing in Australia, and they did the same thing again in China. Very quick to say
protecting the rookie.
Yeah,
I mean,
I understand that. But while the rookie is needing excuses made for him, George Russell is at the front on the podium, ×2, might I add. Second.
You are so sensitive, man. God forbid we criticize a British driver around here, except for Lando Norris for some reason.
Criticize Lando Norris. Because
it feels like you made that an example just because it gives you license to then say this.
I would argue that the sum reason is exactly it. It's not because they're British. It's just that George Russell is a better driver than Lando Norris. But I do think you've educated yourself that the comparison is between Piastri and Russell, not Russell and Norris, because I think that is a foregone conclusion. Right, on that note, I think we should probably...
I don't think it is. We can debate that later.
I think we should probably call it. As usual, please please subscribe. We're always happy to have more of you join the Church of Tired GP. Please leave us a comment. We will read every single one, and we will respond to as many as we possibly can, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.